Just because that guy was talking about Somerset.
Yeah, that's when he said that, I thought Dr. Bennett.
Somerset, Chambersburg.
Yeah, there's a little history there.
Absolutely. I agree. Dr. Biggs, I agree.
Sorry, you can call him Don if you want to. Maryland.
Mr. White. Dr. Simmons.
Wow. I remember that. Oh, Grandpa.
Yeah, that's right.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the August 27th, 2024 work session. I'd like to announce that the meetings of the Mechanicsburg Area School District Board of Directors are being recorded and live streamed for the purpose of transparency and increased public access. The live stream, along with recordings from previously held meetings, can be found on the school board's YouTube channel. Move on to item 3, budget and finance. Item 3.01, investment plan, annual update. Mr. Longwell.
Thank you. So the investment plan annual update really is a function of our board policy that we at least come to the board one time a year to talk a little bit about our strategy around deposits and investments. I'll just say to lead into that conversation, the school code and state regulation kind of outlines for school districts and other municipal governments allowable investments, right? And so we're not allowed to invest in hedge funds or things like that. I think some governments got themselves in trouble maybe decades ago. But all that to say, we live within the requirements of what we're allowed to invest in or deposit our money. We don't really stray from that too often, so we generally use deposit accounts like checking and savings. We use CDs. We use external investment pools, which are like Pliget, if you see in your treasurer's report. And all of that is allowable within school code and the state regulation. We do, in terms of interest rate maximization, a credit to Mrs. Ely, tried to look at if we lock up money a little bit longer term with CDs, can we earn a little bit more money? That requires some cash flow analysis though, because as we're getting tax money in the first part of 6 months, that looks different cash flow wise in the last 6 months. And so we do kind of balance what are our cash needs on a month-to-month basis, but trying to look at that through the lens of how can we lock up some money and earn more money if possible through interest earnings. And so all that to say, I don't expect that we'll really change our strategy in any way. We'll continue to use the financial institutions that we have in the past and that you can see in your monthly treasurer's report. You can see the balances we have with each of those financial institutions and where we're holding our monies. And then ultimately, I guess I just want to again go back and say kudos to Mrs. Ely. I know certainly the interest rate environment has contributed to like an upswing in our interest earnings, but I think it's also a credit to her and the team for managing our cash flow and our balances the way they have, because interest earnings are probably at an all-time high for us. I guess we'll see where the Fed goes with that. So,
are you giving all the credrit to her for that?
Yeah,
because I haven't seen that from you.
Yeah, she deserves a lot of all the credit, So, that in short though is the update. And if there's any questions kind of about our strategy around deposits and investments, I'm happy to take those.
No, you've done a great job.
Thank you you and your staff for the great job that you do. All right, move on to item 4, curriculum. Item 4.01, comprehensive plan update, goal number 1. Dr. Bitts.
Well, the investment plan is exciting because it gives us the resources to do what we do, but this next one, is even more exciting because this is what we do, which is really focus on the program that we're putting together for our students. And in years past, you probably remember as a board, we would often come before this group and we would share our goals for the year kind of in one foul swoop. We would have one presentation where we talk about a number of our goals that we were working on. And certainly there would typically be alignment with our comprehensive plan goals over that 3 to 6 year period. This year, what I wanted to do was actually break it up a little bit. This will allow us to be able to dive a little bit deeper into each goal a little bit more. So tonight we're really going to focus simply on goal 1, and some of the next steps that we're taking with our curriculum assessment and instruction system. The other thing that this allows us to do is it begins to help us to shift out of this mindset that everything happens within a school year, because the reality is it doesn't. And oftentimes we're working on initiatives that may be less than a school year. There may be things that we're looking 18 months out or 2 years to be able to adequately plan for something that's happening. So really the idea that we have to come before you and share all of our goals for the year in August or September, and then we'll talk to you mid-year and then talk to you again at the end, just isn't really how we really move to doing business. So we're excited to be able to share with you these next steps tonight related to Comprehensive Plan Goal 1, and then we will be coming back with some additional presentations related to some of our other goals for the next season, if you will, in future meetings. So I'll ask the team to begin coming up, and I'll continue to give a little bit of a segue to their presentation. Ultimately tonight, you're going to hear related to Goal 1 a number of different areas that we'll be taking next steps with this year. You'll hear about a number of areas on the secondary side of things, and then a number of areas on the elementary side of things that we'll be taking next steps. Ultimately, we will have some additional presentations in the future about some of those items. Others there won't necessarily be that kind of an update with, but many of the items you will hear future presentations about. So this will just be maybe planting a seed tonight about the work that we're doing. You can certainly ask questions about those, but many of those might not be fully formulated yet to be able to talk much about. There is one, however, on the elementary side of things that will end the first portion of the conversation with, and that one we are going to dig a little bit deeper into, and that is something that is vitally important to our system, and that's what we're doing for our students at the primary level related to early literacy teaching. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that and talk about the next steps and some of the work that's already been happening in that area, and we'll be excited to be able to share with you what some future conversations and presentations we'll have for you will be about as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Woodall to take the reins, and she'll be handing off to Mrs. Bachman. And Mrs. Broombaugh is here also representing our secondary level, and the work that they do with Dr. Bowman's leadership is so important to what we do as a system. So.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bitts, and thank you, School Board, for having us here this evening. We're very excited to talk more about our curriculum assessment and instruction system for Goal 1, specifically focusing on our continuous review of curriculum and assessment that ensures the delivery of an academic program that prepares our students for the future. So this evening, as Dr. Bitts said, I'm going to introduce you to some of our focus areas for the year relating to Goal 1. So first, looking at the secondary focus, so 6 to 12, something that we're really excited for this year is the implementation of a curriculum management system. So a curriculum management system, what we currently have is we have our curriculum documents housed in Google, and that works, but it has a little bit of difficulty with communicating back and forth with one another, and also looking at an analysis of our curriculum. With the adoption of a curriculum or the implementation of a curriculum management system, we can start running different reports so we can look at alignment between the results that we say that we're going to meet, our evidence that we're looking for, and the plan of how we're teaching for those results. So we're really excited to start that implementation with English Language Arts this year and Social Studies. So we're starting slow with certain groups to move faster later on through. And English Language Arts and Social Studies at the secondary level have a very solid curriculum to go off of for us to start with them as a pilot to see how we're going to expand this outwards with others. And with EduPlanet 21, this system is actually a local company in Mechanicsburg. They are literally in our backyard. So, you know, we're keeping taxpayer dollars within our system here. Another area of focus is that we're going to be looking at evidence-based essential elements of lesson planning. So we're going to be specifically focusing this year on clearly defined results, and then also how we're making thinking and learning visible and accountable through reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So how are our teachers integrating that within their planning to be strategic with their students? And then finally, we have ongoing curriculum development for science, technology education, family consumer science, and business computer information technology. And when we talk about BCIT, business and computer information technology, we're looking really at career development and financial literacy. So again, looking at how are we utilizing our academic program to prepare students for the future. At the elementary level, we're very excited. Last year, if you remember, you approved K-12 curriculum level maps for social studies. 4th and 5th grade are working this year in English language arts on that social studies integration. So they're working on piloting 1 unit of instruction, and they're building their other 2 units out this year with that integration. We're also going to be exploring K-5, the new STEEL standards that go into implementation next year, and what that means for our science instruction. So we're looking at the pedagogy and how our teachers can use 3-dimensional learning to help make science more engaging for our students. Related to that is also a reimagining of what our fine and applied arts looks like at that K-5 level, to include technology and engineering. So how are we getting more STEM? I will say that our current library does a great job with integrating some STEM, but how can we get more in there for our students, again, to prepare them for that future level? And as Dr. Bitts mentioned, we're also going to be focusing on the advancement of our early literacy, specifically at that K-3 level. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Mrs. Bachman, and she's going to go more into detail. She's going to provide a high-level overview today. So more in detail with what we're talking about in Focus Area 4, but it's a high-level overview, as we'll come back later to discuss more details as we progress through the year. So thanks, Mrs. Bachman.
Good evening. So as Mrs. Woodall shared, we are exhilarated in thinking about our 4th and 5th graders interacting with the social studies curriculum that was board approved. The opportunities the curriculum will afford them in terms of transacting with complex text, engaging in rich discourse, is going to take them to a new level. And we want to thank the board again for approving a curriculum that prioritizes thinking over discrete memorization of facts. In thinking about our 4th and 5th graders, reading, writing, speaking, and listening to learn, we recognize that we have to have a strong Tier 1 program at the K-3 level that teaches our students how to read, how to write, speak, and listen, so that our intermediate students can engage in the kind of deep learning and thinking. We know that reading is the act of making meaning, and we instill that in our students from early on in their journey. However, our students cannot make meaning of text that they can't decode or access. We're reminded when it comes to early literacy that students who are proficient and at proficient levels of literacy achieve grade level standards. They attend, they come to school, and they experience frequent opportunities of competency. Success breeds success. And so our students feel a greater sense of belonging and higher self-esteem when they're literate. Behaviors diminish because students have a seat at the table of learning. Their overall wellness is impacted because they're able to make important and informed decisions inside and outside of school. When students are reading and writing by the end of 3rd grade, they are 4 times more likely to graduate on time as opposed to their counterparts. And it was years back, I mean a decade or more ago, that we strategically reconfigured our buildings with the target of having our students reading and writing by the end of grade 3. When we think about literacy, it's all encompassing. It impacts every area of our comprehensive goals. We have always operated from the stance of students first. And when it comes to literacy, we are no different in that mindset. We are relentless in our efforts to put our students on a positive trajectory for school and life success. This spring, we took an opportunity to form an early literacy committee, and that committee was comprised of teachers, teacher leaders, interventionists, coaches, specialists, building, and district leaders. And during that, we focused on 2 key tasks. One was engaging in a curriculum evaluation, looking at our curriculum at the unit level. The other was an early literacy scan, which allowed us to take a look from a systems level. What are we seeing? What are we unveiling in terms of assessment, professional learning, classroom supports, and more? What do we find through that evaluation? They gave us language, and they gave us a framework to help look through and affirm many of the things that we're feeling for the last several years. When our current ELA curriculum was built, we had a lot of great hands into that work. There was amazing work that happened with the curriculum, and there was a tremendous level of understanding in that process. As time has moved on, and we've had new teachers in the system, and we had COVID and reprioritization, it's been hard to sustain that level of understanding, given how complex early literacy is. Our K-12 curriculum level that you passed is strong and it's robust, and we're not looking to make any changes to that system. In fact, it's central to our mission. But our unit level is where teachers, and through our work, are feeling that we need to have a backbone to support the unit level curriculum to provide a what to be teaching in terms of literacy for our students. Additionally, there was an opportunity to do some vision casting. So we could talk about, at its ideal best, what does early literacy look like for our students? And from that work grew two outcomes. One was the creation of guiding principles. And these were to guide our vision in terms of that ideal best. And in our principles, we affirmed much of what we've known about literacy, things that we've done and will continue to do right by our students. Our principles also stretch us. What's been learned in terms of neuroscience is absolutely fascinating in thinking about the brain and learning to read and write. The principles also remind us that we're continually evolving. The long-running joke at elementary is if you stand still long enough, you'll be laminated. But we don't do that when it comes to curriculum and assessment and instruction. We know better. We're continually reflecting, we're revising, and thinking about the science of learning. We also wanted to ground our practice because practice needs to align to vision. So we're looking at exploring programs to anchor our practice. You'll notice the term program being underlined. A program is not a curriculum. Again, we have our K-12 transfer goals, our key understandings that we're looking to remain intact. What we're looking at exploring is a program that will help teachers have that pathway to getting to those larger results. When we think about early literacy, my mind thinks about a patchwork quilt. So in my tenure in the district, pushing now year 30, so year 29, I've had the vantage point of teaching at kindergarten, first and second grade, serving as a reading specialist in grades 3, 4, and 5, and then working as an instructional coach, and also in this role alongside all of our K-5 teachers and our teacher leaders and our building leaders. And when we think about a patchwork, there's so many intricacies that go into a patchwork quilt, and that holds true for reader. You have to think about morphology, orthography, phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, text structures, text features, and we could go on. It is a heavy lift for a K-3 teacher who's teaching everything. A K-3 teacher who's teaching math, science, social studies, and more on top of getting our students able to read and write. Giving our teachers a backbone at this level will help them to focus their energies on bringing those instructional practices to life versus spending time to figure out what and how this all goes together. Because when we weave things strategically, we have a masterpiece. And when it's left to chance, well, you can visualize what happens. Bringing a backbone is also a benefit for our 4-5 intermediate level. Our students then will come with the foundational skills so that they can then grapple with complex pieces of text. Otherwise, we're left to water those texts down or find other means for discourse and conversation. As Mrs. Woodall previewed, we are looking to take a big picture look this evening and planning to come back for several sessions. I think it helps, though, to just touch upon the sub-goals that align with our larger goal of providing a strong Tier 1 program for early literacy. One of the things we're looking at is time allocations. So when in the student day will there be explicit instruction of learning how to read, write, speak, and listen, with the understanding that literacy happens all day long. Our students are continually using literacy as a tool for learning. We need to build teachers' confidence and ability to make instructional decisions. There's no silver bullet. Okay. Our teachers need to be smarter than a program. so we need to build their capacity. Our principals are our instructional leaders. So they will be engaged in professional learning well in advance of our classroom teachers so that we can build their collective knowledge and understanding around early literacy. We are looking to be able to recommend an early literacy program to the board this coming spring for adoption next school year. Now, to get to that recommendation, we are being just as intentional in our steps. So I mentioned the Early Literacy Committee. We'll be coming back together in mid-September. And at that committee, they will be unpacking several programs that Mrs. Woodall and I are bringing forward that have grown out of work we've done over the summer in terms of looking at our transfer goals, our guiding principles, and what we've learned in terms of neuroscience. So they will be using rubric that addresses all three components to unpack the programs. They will recommend then 2 programs for piloting. We'll be looking to equip and train the pilot teachers, and then they will start in November. They will pilot from November through March with ongoing reflection, coming back together, looking at the rubric, and unpacking the challenges, the successes, and so forth. We'll then reconvene as a large committee again in March, so that everyone in the committee can hear about the pilots and the findings. And from there, then we'll put our recommendation forward to bring to the board.
Thank you, Mrs. Bachman. So with that, are there any questions about the big picture goals that we have for this year? Again, remembering that we will be coming back, as Mrs. Bachman said, to delve deeper into some of these throughout the year.
I just want to see if I'm remembering correctly from the social studies presentation of the curriculum. For example, if students are learning in social studies about the Underground Railroad in history class or in social studies class, will they be reading like fictional works about like stories that have to do with that? Is that the kind of integration you're looking to do? Is that accurate?
Yes. So for the 4th and 5th grade level, their social studies will be part of their English language arts block. So if they're reading about the Underground Railroad, they'll be reading fictional and non-fictional text about that topic and learning how to, you know, identify the text features, read, write, speak, and listen for that learning.
You said you're going to evaluate 2 different programs this year. Is like half the teachers using one and the other half using the other one, or how are you going to evaluate both at the same time?
So we have, as part of our early literacy committee, we have 2 teachers per grade level on the early literacy committee. 1 teacher per grade level will be piloting one program. The other teacher per grade level will be piloting the other program. So we're not doing it district-wide. It's just going to be a small subset of individuals that are piloting it. And we'll be putting out information to those families so that they know that their classroom is participating in a pilot.
We'll also be out in the classrooms, and then we hired, you helped hire a K-3 literacy coach. So the literacy coach will be intimately involved in going into the classrooms as well to support, co-teach, to model, and to unpack feedback.
So I'd like to say, oftentimes when I hear presentations to the board, I have a scientific brain, so a lot of times the educational stuff is I'm not up to speed. But I will tell you that your presentation was fascinating to me because it took on a scientific method approach to early literacy, and I think it's great. And oftentimes we think of education as simply speaking to students or you know, jamming down information down students' throats. But this was a very, very unique presentation to me. I think it touched on the fact that here in Mechanicsburg, we're really focused on educating the educators and using a very scientific method in order to do that. I would argue that method definitely bears really, really great fruit, and it's data-driven. So kudos to you guys and coming up with this. I think it's really in-depth. I think there's the presentation, if I'm going to be bold, the presentation only touches the surface in terms of what you guys were looking at, and some of the things like, you know, neuroscience that's coming into this, and other areas. It's fascinating. It's great, and it shows how we're educating students here. it's impressive. So really, really great presentation. It had me from beginning to the end.
I'm curious to know, so being involved with curriculum long ago, right? So the central questions at the unit level are going to stay the same. I know I'm trying not to get into the roots. It's really hard for me, really hard. So they're going to stay the same, I think, is what I heard you say. We're not changing that. The level of curriculum that comes to the board is not going to change, essentially, right?
Correct.
But all of the learning units will have to change if you're going to now rely on the basal, which is really what it's going to be, right? That's what we call it, the old days. They call
The
it
old days,
basal.
yes.
The old days. That's what we call it.
Programs have grown.
I hope. I hope.
Yes.
So that there still will be that opportunity for differentiation with whatever program I'm sure you put forth, because I think that would be a very important part of whatever we do. Because kids need different things at different times along the way.
Absolutely.
But I do, and I hear what you're saying, because I understand from the curriculum development process, the way Mechanicsburg has done it as long as I've been here, has always been the value of teachers being part of the process is the education that occurs. And to your point, Mrs. Bachman, as time goes on, you lose those people. They're different places. They don't have the same background when you go to implement that curriculum, and that's very challenging. I understand that. I think that the professional development will be essential, and I will be very curious to hear the level of, what's the right word? It's not integrity that you expect of following, yes, thank you. The fidelity of maintaining the program, which we all know can be quite a little bit of a challenge as you go to implementation.
I think part of the benefit of that is also that we knew while this committee was meeting this past year that we didn't want to wait to not take any steps. So one of the things that we did last year, and our building leaders and these folks were essential with it, was really challenging the fidelity of foundations,
Right.
which we
That's
do
right.
continue to anticipate being a part of the broader literacy curriculum at the primary level, because the program isn't equal to the curriculum.
Right.
So we do see foundations still having a place there.
Right.
So that really gave us an opportunity, that and frankly our fidelity with everyday math and kind of upping the ante with that, to be having some of those conversations the last couple of
Good.
years to say,
Good.
listen, our expectation is that this is what we're doing. And yes, there's opportunity then through the art of teaching at the lesson level to identify what does differentiation look like
Good.
for your students in your classroom.
With guided reading, I assume still being something that's happening, whatever that, something similar to it, whatever we call it now.
Small group instruction,
Whatever you want
explicit
to call it.
instruction,
Yeah.
being read,
Small
level
group.
2, all the genres. Yes,
Wonderful.
as we talked in our, we would look, and we're not this evening going granular the guiding principles. We would echo that a lot of what we've done will remain.
I'm sure that it will be wonderful under your leadership.
I think that the question touches on something that I think for you as board members, I think maybe gives you some information to have as talking points, is that you'll often hear right now, the ongoing never-ending reading wars, the idea of what is the way that we should teach students to read. And it's interesting that you talk about the scientific aspect to it, because the newest iteration, if you will, is the idea that it's a science of reading. And certainly research has improved immensely to be able to understand better what it takes to help somebody to learn how to read, particularly our youngest learners. But when you get right down to the core, ultimately it's still a balanced approach, and the reading wars is about, well, it's not balanced literacy anymore, it's not a basal, it's not guided reading, it's not this. Really, we're still talking about a lot of the same things. We just have a deeper level of understanding of the complexity that it takes to definitely allow a student to learn how to read. And I think this approach ultimately honors that, and honors the fact that our teachers, in order to understand that complexity, need to have a solid backbone to be able to give them a framework to be able to teach from.
But as a board member too, when I look at things, when I look at presentations and when I look at what I'm required by our community, it's not necessarily being in the weeds or looking at the actual instruction. It's to really look at the process. And I think you've clearly shown us today that your process of how we're evaluating, how we're educating these students is pretty impressive. And so that's kind of, as a board member, that's what I look at as process. I don't know anything about the weeds.
As a classroom teacher, I appreciate culture. because it's the culture of belonging and feeling that you're contributing and you're growing, and students really respond to that, and I think that's, but to put that in the center is also really great.
And I'll speak to process too. I think you're still honoring the processes we followed over time, involving teachers along the way, which is essential. To speak to that, point two of culture. Well, I have a question, not a question, but just this goes back to the secondary part.
Yeah.
I just have to say this. So the EduPlanet, when we were in Elmwood upstairs, however long ago that was as district office, I brought EduPlanet forward to the table at one point. So I support that wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly.
It will,
Yeah.
Adriana and I have been geeking out about it.
Yes, I'm sure you have. I do, at that time, I understand why it was kind of pushed aside because we were a little busy developing a whole new curriculum system. However, it would have helped along the way to do that too. But I think it was Dr. Van Drew who said that. Since he's not here.
Well, thank you, Mr. Longwell, for
Yeah,
allowing.
see, there you go.
I will say on the classroom visits in 4th and 5th grade that I saw a intentional design around the reading material and integrating the social studies into the reading, and it made me want to read. I mean, it's just like books were set up, and it seemed like the topic might have been like World War II or something like that, and I finally realized, oh, that's what they were talking about. Right? So it's not just, here, read a book. It's read about that book, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. So I saw that in a couple of classrooms too.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you for a super report and keep us informed.
And thank you all, and I do want to just say a little bit here. Mrs. Bachman did not make it to work today because she is not feeling well, but she is so passionate about this topic that even though I said, hey, I have it, she still had her daughter bring her in today so she could be here to speak. Sorry, I did tell her I was going to say that, so she did give me permission.
I hope you feel better. Thank you. Just have some vertigo. Well, I have terrible vertigo.
Go home. Goodbye.
Not at all.
All right. We will move on to item 5, facilities. Item 5.01, stair tower construction, MMS. Dr. Fitz.
Yes. Board's okay with this, we're gonna kind of merge immediately then into 5.02 along with 5.01 in the
I'll just read that into the record then. 5.02 is the track replacement at the high school.
Very good. So we will start in the presentation, actually, I believe it starts big picture, but then we'll dig into a little bit with track replacement, and then the presentation does go into the stair tower as well. And we have Brian Haynes with us from CRA, who hasn't been the primary architect with these two projects, these specific aspects of these projects, but you know him well from the big picture of the projects. So he'll certainly be here as a resource to be able to help us with any aspect. And you know Mr. Kastner as well. And just a quick opportunity to thank Mr. Kastner for the amazing work he and the rest of the team, including Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Harris, did to help get the high school ready for the start of school here this week, and safe for students and everything accessible that we needed to have accessible. So kudos to you, sir. Thank you. Just going back to future facility needs. So you know that we came forward last year to talk about facilities planning. Several of you were on the committee that looked at a number of different potential projects that we studied around storage, auxiliary spaces, our sites and our campuses, to be able to say what are some of the next steps that we might need to take beyond the bulk of the construction, renovation, and addition projects that we've already done. So really the specific question is what building and grounds needs will have to be addressed to best support our learning community in the next 5 to 7 years as we look ahead to 2030. And really once we have the enrollment piece taken care of, what are some of these other pieces that we need to continue to update? So we did prioritize that list in 3 categories. The first one being ongoing required maintenance. Again, just a snapshot there. Remember, these are those things that we do have scheduled maintenance for. So we know that there's some replacement that needs to happen to some sections of roof on certain buildings at certain times, and we have that scheduled out. Those are pieces that are already planned. But then we do have some items that we added to this facilities planning list related to both short-term priorities and then longer-term possibilities of some things that we might look at to continue to facilitate or provide facilities for our district. So tonight, we're going to dive into two that you've already been talking a little bit about here at the board table before tonight, but we want to provide some updates on two of them, and Mr. Longwell will take it from there.
Dr. Betts. So as Dr. Betts did a nice job outlining those three areas of the facilities planning, one, the ongoing kind of needs of the district and looking out 5 to 7 years, but knowing that since our feasibility study back in 2015 and 16, we've had other needs that have come up, and we know that those might be needs that maybe they are something in the short term, or maybe they are something in the long term. And so I think a good example of that is the track, where 10 or 15 years ago, this probably wasn't as high of a priority, but now we're at the point that we do need to replace the track. And frankly, as we've been talking with the board through, if you remember Mr. Hoffman's annual capital reserve fund list, we've been setting aside some monies for the track. That was happening alongside the high school project. And I think as the high school project has progressed, and then talking with Mr. Kastner and Crabtree, I think there's a great opportunity, some synergy, where the high school project is coming to a close. There's some fields, as you'll see later in the graphic here, that have to be restored as part of those projects. But also then how does that maybe affect the adjoining track and some other work that we hope to do. And so some value in maybe doing that as under kind of one umbrella, rather than trying to take bites of the apple and saying, well, we're going to do this piece, and this piece, and then maybe undo work that had already been done. And so that's some of where our thinking is. So by way of preview, I'll share three kind of developments that have happened here. And so the practice field restoration, so just to orient ourselves, top right corner of the picture, it's a little bit hard to see, but that's the building sitting there and the Wildcat Activity Center. Thank you, Dr. Betts. And then the track there, and then the practice field is above there. Dr. Betts, I don't know if you, that's the practice fields that were there, and then that's the current laydown area for all of the construction projects. And so what's interesting about it is, as we talk about wrapping up Project 2 and Project 3, which is the renovation of the high school and the pool area, in that existing project, kind of that reddish pink color, the practice area at the very top, that's all part of what's already on the books to be done. We know that there's some other pieces of the project that we hope to accomplish, like the track resurfacing. But as we prepare for track and field events again, we know there's field events, right? And so the field events are going to happen. You can see some of the green areas in that practice. So that's kind of like a project layered on top of a project. And we don't want to come in and undo work that was already done by a previous project. And so that's where our thinking started to shift toward, let's look at this as one holistic project and do it all together as part of a sequence of phase project versus like finishing up the practice field restoration, separately bidding, storage building, track expansion. And I think there's an opportunity to do all of this as a change order because of its proximity to the entire project, the timing of it, and frankly, all of the work that has to be done, you know, it does overlap a little bit into the different scopes of work. And so that's what led us to wanting to continue to look at the track project with the board, but then saying, how does that kind of interface with the existing high school project there as we're wrapping that up? And so, in short, as we outline the scope of the track itself needs replaced. And I've learned a lot over the years about facilities, and it's interesting to learn what is actually under the track and how that surface has to be in nearly perfect condition, I'll say. And so we found through some samples that there's some work that needs to be done that's just even beneath the track. And so we've tried to outline what's the scope look like for the track replacement. We've also talked about the practice fields, and as those get prepared to be restored here this spring and then the following summer, what does that look like, knowing that that will also eventually be the throwing areas that you can see in green. And so I think having the value of having our current set of contractors oversee the totality of this project, as you can see all the pieces that are intertwined, that's our recommendation to move forward in that way. And then in terms of the project itself, it is the track replacement, it is restoring the practice fields, the throwing areas, and then there's also probably right above the track on the left-hand side, there's a storage facility there. And so if the board is aware, and I know many have seen, the number of sheds we have dotted around the landscape up there at the high school. And some of them are not in great condition, frankly, and there's an opportunity to kind of consolidate. I think we are talking about adding a smaller storage facility so that that'll serve track and field and some of the other needs on that side of the campus and allow us to get rid of those older sheds that aren't in great condition. And then the final piece of it is we are looking at the possibility of a scorers. I wasn't a track and field athlete, so the area where the scoring folks sit and observe. And
We have another one of those rundown green sheds there as you approach the front of the track near the start-finish line, and that's currently the scoring area, but just replacing that as well.
So all that to say, as we move through the fall and into the winter months, knowing that we want to continue to wrap up the high school project, we think there's a good opportunity to kind of consolidate that with some proposals around what we want to do with the track, the storage facility, and try to do all of that seamlessly together so that we don't have multiple mobilizations, we don't have contractors tripping over each other. And again, because of all of our thinking around what happens as a holistic project, I think this will be a good opportunity to combine that. In terms of the project cost, we obviously will get credit for what's the practice field, but there are costs associated with the track resurfacing, the little drive to the storage facility, and some of the other work to be done, fencing and so forth. And we're estimating that cost range to be between $2.5 and $3 million. And that would be a change order to project 2. And we'll talk about next steps, but in short, we would expect to return to the board with a more refined scope on this. This is kind of the preliminary where we are with it. We had the spring conversation. We've worked over the summer to kind of get to this point to say conceptually here's what we're thinking, and then we'll come back for another conversation before we would move forward with that change order. So.
And if I remember right, I'm sorry. The money that we had budgeted for the high school and to have this $3 million change order, do we feel like there's money left over from that?
Yeah, suffice it to say, without boring you with all the accounting details of it, which I could talk all night about that. Yeah. We do have the money that we've issued bonds for, right? And so that's one source of funding to continue to wrap up the high school. And we view the track as partly wrapping up the high school project. So what funds are what we have there? How are we going to finish the project? We also separately have been setting aside some money in the capital reserve fund, which includes the track replacement. And then the other thing is, as Dr. Bitts and I talk, there's also our long range vision for like the money we have in our debt service fund, right? And so we just annually budget what we pay out in debt service, and so to carry a reserve in that might be better to appropriate that for other capital projects that we need in the future. And so all that to say, that's a really quick crash course to say, yes, we have the funds available. We know that the funds will allow us to address projects like this, the stair towers, but also some other projects that the Facilities Planning Committee had addressed, because our goal is to manage those funds in a way that I'm not going to say we'll never issue debt again, but hopefully in the next several years we don't have any issues there.
In the spring, I think you left it with us that you would have to go check with, I don't know if it was Crabtree, somebody to see if we could make this a change order, if it would still fit into the scope of the project.
It's a good question. Yeah, very good question. So as the board knows and recalls probably, we've done it both ways, and it depends on the particulars of the project. And so if you think about Elmwood, when we added a second floor addition to Steel Hall, as we were looking at enrollment and seeing the increases and looking at our decision insight reports, we said we actually need some additional classrooms yet. And so we already had a project on the books to add the second floor. We needed to come alongside and build an addition on the end of that to build more classroom space. And so the proximity of the construction to each other, the fact that there was already a project going on, that's a good example where, yeah, that can be a change order. It was a big change order, but it was one where you don't want a set of contractors building the second floor addition and then another set of contractors building the addition on the end of the building. And so that was one that we felt comfortable moving forward to change order. So to Ms. Morgan's point then, the other side of that coin is the pool, where the natatorium is on the end of the building. There's really, while the building's being renovated, there's really no other direct connection to the work at the natatorium as it relates to what's happening inside the building. And we could sufficiently kind of divide that off, if you will, in a way that if we got a different set of bidders, then the pool could proceed in that way. And the pool really, in fairness, evolved after the project really began, because that new pool was something that we were already off and running with the new high school project, and then we started to say, let's go back and look at the pool. I think the factors that I would say that led us to this change order is, as you look at these three areas, and we talked to our solicitor and some other experts on this, consultants, you have the practice fields at the very top already in the current project. Then you have our desire to resurface the track, which we did start talking about even during the high school construction. We knew we wanted to do the track. We were kind of debating about what was the right way to do that. And then you have some of the other green areas about tying in different elements of the site with fencing and things like that. And so the fact that all of those areas kind of overlap one into the other and the timing of the project, we're comfortable with moving forward with the change order. So that was a really long answer to say we did.
I didn't know what I asked anymore.
In the facility task force planning, there was some discussion about turf, possible turf there.
Yep.
Is that, I know it goes beyond this project, but is that still in focus or being talked about?
So I would say the facilities planning committee, there is the list of additional projects. And so from our perspective, we wanted to kind of look at that and say, from a priority standpoint, we knew the track had to be, we've got to be back online for 25, 26. And so I know we're 12 or 18 months away from that track season, but the funny thing is it'll take that long to get everything up and running. The same goes for, frankly, the stair towers. That's a priority for us. We really want to get that moving. The turf, some of the other things I think are still on the table, and we do want to talk about it. I think specific to this particular turf, there was, as you probably remember, Dr. Lebo, there was turf inside the track, and there was also turf at north side. And so as we looked at it in terms of athletic competitions and how might it be used, I think our priority, at least initially, and we're still studying this, so I don't want to say this is the rock solid, it's Greg Longwell. But we would probably see recommending to the board at some point, north side would be a priority over turfing the inside of the track, just because of the uses. There's already infrastructure for the events. They have the lights, they've got the stadium seating and things like that. That's not to say we would never come back and think about this inside the track. And that was a question we studied as part of the track conversation, was to say, if we do all of this work and at some point a future board or administration comes back and says, let's turf inside the track, let's make sure we don't have to undo work that was already done. And so we feel confident that the recommendation we have here won't preclude us from coming back and doing a turf project if we have to or want to. But that ultimately, in terms of priorities, as we look out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, we know the turf is a conversation we want to have with Seth and others in our district, but it probably wouldn't be that as the first location.
So I know another concern was getting the band off of the parking lot as their sole place of practice. Does the work that's being done in the pink area and the field allow for that to happen, or is that?
So I'll phrase it a little bit differently, as not necessarily a concern, but potentially one of the benefits that was discussed of could they have a different space. That was always discussed without them necessarily saying that they would even want to move to that space, even if
Right.
it was turfed, which I'm not entirely sure that they would want to actually move off of the parking lot. So ultimately, it does, potentially hinder that as being an extra benefit. But again, I'm not entirely sure that they would choose to do that, even if we did turf.
I didn't know that required that to be turf necessarily, but I think there seemed to be a good bit of discussion around the option of having the band on the parking lot is not optimal for students who park there, for safety concerns. I mean, that seems like a very makeshift arrangement. Even if they have some preferences to like it, it doesn't seem like the optimal safe environment. I mean, I see they park cars around to block it off.
I think this.
Well, they have lights in the parking lot so they can practice all night long, but they would need a space as big as a football stadium because they take up that much space when they perform.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's that big of a space here for them to.
So I'll say that the two recommendations tonight really don't preclude us from all those other options of the facilities planning committee. I think Dr. Bitts and I have been talking with Mr. Hoffman and others, Mr. Panic, to talk about the rest of the list. I think those are still conversations we want to come back to the board with and share an update at a future meeting or future meetings as the years progress. Really, I think as we looked at the list and said, Mr. Hoffman's going to continue, if we go back to the 3 areas Dr. Bitts shared, the ongoing maintenance, he'll continue to come to the board and report in January what's on the list, what roof needs recoated, what HVAC needs replaced. That'll continue to happen every year like it has. And then those other 2 buckets, if you will, of the 3, the short-term and long-term, there's got to be continued conversation about what's in those two, the short-term and long-term, to say, well, what about the Herf Field, and what about some of the things at Elmwood that we've talked about, and what about these other things that we identified. I think from our perspective, as we looked at the track, we had lost the throwing areas when we started the construction project, so we knew that one was like rising to the top of the list. Not to say it was more important than the other things, but that one was one we got to get to. And then the stair towers, just because middle school enrollment's gotten so big that we really feel that.
Just one last comment. This will be my last comment on this. I raised some reservations, but I would definitely affirm prioritizing the track. I've pointed out before that we have a 4-year stretch following COVID where our track athletes haven't had a home meet. So I affirm prioritizing this to move ahead quickly, even if some of those other longer range things don't get addressed.
And I'll quickly add to that, we thought to honor those students as best we could, we did investigate, is there any possibility that we could have this available for this spring? So that wouldn't be the case. But ultimately, because of the timing of having the throwing area accessible to be able to grow grass, for it to be able to be accessible, it's just not possible for this spring. So ultimately, and unfortunately, that will be the case for this group.
Yeah, and again, I've come to accept that, but, and I no longer have a daughter who's on the track team, so it's not about me personally, but
Well, I have a senior who's in that boat,
knowing
so
people on the track,
I have to
yeah.
answer her.
So I affirm prioritizing that.
So curiosity, sometimes we say kill the cat. I mean, I don't even know, how much does it cost to put a turf in there? Do we have any other, can somebody throw out a number? I mean, what are we even
You go
talking
back and
about?
take a look at, well, we put like 400,000, we put 400,000 aside to maintain,
Replace it.
to replace the existing track at
$500,000.
Memorial.
That was just to replace
The additional field, so it's gonna be.
Water retention,
Probably over.
I've done really, yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money. We're not talking about like.
What we initially spent 15 years ago, whatever, back at the stadium. I think
Yeah.
you inflate that, it would be well into 7 figures.
And I think it's definitely above $1 million now. I think it's.
I mean, it's what,
200.
400,000 just to replace
Right.
the top, the
Yeah.
surface, which we've done one time, so it's.
Which honestly kind of goes back to kind of managing our reserves too. That's another piece that we've talked a lot about, is we do want to be cognizant of where we are financially, and so in some ways we don't want to stick too many irons in the fire.
Oh, right.
Because we're wrapping up the high school project, we're doing the track, we're doing the high school, the middle school stair towers.
What would we do with the turf in the middle of the running track? Like,
So I think it would, part of the reason that recommendation came about was because of the band, could they use it, could it be
is
an
this large as
opportunity
a football
for
field?
practice?
The football field, it can fit inside.
That's where they
Football field or the
practice
soccer
right now.
field can fit inside the track.
Kind of
Normally,
soccer?
a lot of schools do have.
It's regulation track, so either soccer or football would fit inside it.
I know football would, but I don't know about the
Today,
next
we
one.
could fit a football because my son did run track, and I can't imagine there being
Not
a
a
football.
stadium, a field.
A field, I can't imagine a field fitting in there.
It's there.
But it would be the discussion was around it being practice, not practice.
Yes.
And the thinking that perhaps a band could use, that was kind of the,
That was the committee's goal, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
but there
I
was a
didn't-
lot of
I-
logistics. to it.
I never imagined it being that large.
And honestly, as another lens, I think when you look at like athletic rec community use, I think there's a bigger conversation to be had there where, well, turf inside the track, or turf at north side, or do we need expanded bleacher seating at Memorial Stadium? And I think some prioritization. So just some conversations of, all those things are discussions that have to come down the road, but for now, we wanted to keep our focus on those two.
So timeframe, this wouldn't conflict with the spring season, it sounds like, we still be able to use what facilities for the track, continue to rec track team.
So the track team hasn't, that's a little bit what I think Dr. Lebo and Dr. Bitts were referring to. The track team hasn't been using the track because we lost the throwing areas, I think, 3 years ago.
We haven't had home meets.
I'm sorry, home meets,
Yes.
that's what
Yeah.
I was sorry.
For practice.
Yes.
Yeah, so they'll navigate the phasing of it to make sure that the track itself continues to be available for practices this spring.
But we won't host a home meet until 26.
Correct.
Spring of 26.
And that's what we examined in fairness to the students. We did say, is there some way to expedite it and get it for 25? But logistically, it just wasn't something that we could find a path for, so.
And because there's that retention pond right there,
Mhm.
it looks like there is the ability to get to the throwing area to kind of go around, is that correct?
Yeah, and we've talked about that, the path, and that came into where the throwing areas go, and retention pond was part of it, the topography of, so we've looked at, studied all that, so. So the second one is the stair tower, and so I think this is interesting, maybe to go back to some conversations we've had over the years, maybe even all the way back to 2016, 17, 18, when we talked about the compelling why between behind our projects. We talked about mechanical and infrastructure of our buildings, the academic needs of our programs, enrollment. I think this one you could point to and say is an enrollment issue or matter that we've had to study, because the building has increased in size to the point, I think we're at 1,100 students probably at the middle school, which, and not to throw out some more analogies, but the middle school by itself is probably as big as 5 individual districts in our IU, so it's a pretty big building. And we found that the core areas of the building, circulation, getting upstairs and downstairs, the stairwells are narrow. I think all been in middle school, and we know that there has to be something more done for those stair towers to help aid circulation, especially in the core areas of the building. And so we've talked about what can we do around stair towers. And so as you orient yourself to this graphic, on the left-hand side, we would be kind of looking at the middle school from the side. Market Street would be on your left-hand side because you can see the circled area there is the media center, and then it calls out in a bigger kind of way. And so in the bigger graphic, the core area there is to the left, the media center is in the middle, and then you can start to see the courtyard where those orange blocks are. And so
Cafeteria here, if that helps too. Comments.
The orange blocks are what we're looking to say, can we add stair towers there that are bigger in profile, they're wider, build them into the courtyard, but attach them to the building. Frankly, from a timing perspective, that also helps us because if we're able to move through the procurement process and bidding with this project, because we will have to bid this one, we could potentially start the work even in the spring because it doesn't interrupt what's happening inside the building. So they can start laying block, the foundation, the brickwork, and then by the time summer rolls around, they're tying it into the building. And so we're still on kind of conceptual design at this point and thinking about, where do the stair towers face? How do they get into the building? Is it against the media center? Is it down below? You can see these ones are, a little bit of a space between the media center, but we have gone far enough to estimate the project and also develop a proposed timeline. And so within that, the design really started this summer where we kind of picked up where we left off a number of years ago to say, if we were to do stair towers, what might that look like? We're continuing to design that here over the next couple months. And then we would plan to do some bidding through November and into January, and then construction potentially would begin there in February and through August. And so in terms of a project estimate, we're looking at 1.1 million to 1.3 million. And again, I would just point out construction-wise, our hope is then that we're able to fast track, no pun intended, the track and also the stair tower, so that we're finishing those up in the summer and heading into the fall of 2025.
So what was orange, that's the proposed stairwells?
The timeline, yeah.
And the existing ones are going to, I'm sorry, on the previous slide, there's existing stairs.
Yeah.
Top and bottom, would they remain them as well? So you'd have 2 ways to?
Yeah, and we're still talking about that. That's some of the conversation to say, do the existing stairs which are built into the building, do they stay? Do they become incorporated into the stair towers? We've gone far enough along that we felt like we could bring the board an update to say, here's the estimate, here's the timeline, but we know we do intend to come back to the board with an additional update to say, here's our exact proposal on what the stair towers will look like and how that'll impact the flow in the building, and where we head with bidding.
Accessibility, we have,
There are elevators too.
There are.
okay.
Yes.
So this is,
There's
They're across the hallway and then up and down. They're kind of just off the image here, kind of north and south of the image.
Okay.
And there's no concern about working within the courtyard. I know we had to, the bridge had to be built because of concerns. There's no concerns of a stairwell going into the courtyard area
From an egress perspective, no.
from a safety perspective.
from fire department?
No.
So this is our second renovation to deal with flow in the school, right? Because we did the
walkway.
the bridge, the walkway.
Sorry, did you say that again?
Bridge, walkway. So did that not alleviate the flow of the kids moving around as much as we thought? Or is that second floor and this, we're talking first floor?
Yeah. So I would suggest that it has as much to do with the rest of the building as that walkway, because this walkway definitely helps with students crossing between the back end of the building. But here, there's still a tremendous number of students that, whether they're coming from lunch, coming from the gym, coming from the music areas, that they're trying to get from this core section of the building downstairs underneath this wing and underneath this wing throughout the day. So that's really where the pinch points are happening, is coming from these areas. And you can only imagine after a lunch how many students are filtering down through those two stairwells. So this definitely was necessary. It was a huge help to the flow of the building on the back end, but from the core area perspective, it's pretty stuck.
I would have a question. I'm sure you guys thought of this, so I feel like I shouldn't even mention it, but we have often talked about the ability to add classroom space to that courtyard if we had to, if we would this impede any of that in the future, or if we had to do something in that courtyard, are we?
I think that's a good question, honestly, and it is something we looked at. I think where we landed with the location of these stair towers is partly because of that. Because we did even look at, well, what about stair towers on the back side of the building? And it does start to impede, because you see where there's a little bit of a notch. I'm not just saying that, but other options for stair towers impeded a possible additional classroom space. And so these locations, I think, were probably the best possible solution to add stair towers, fix some of the capacity issues in the flow of the building, but then preserve options for future classrooms, if ever needed.
So, I don't know, I think this is an architect question, but like, would you leave the staircases there that are there now and just add another set, like beside them?
We're still looking at options on that, honestly. I mean, to me, we've talked a lot about that in-house, and I think there's a lot of merit to leaving the stairs there, because when you look at where the new stairs are positioned, you'd be walking around the corner to get to them. So it would be a lot easier for the kids to circulate throughout that wing and go up both ends. There's stair towers at the far end, Ms. Morgan, where you talked about where the bridge is. You see the two stair towers kind of above and below that orange arrow coming through. So there's stair towers that basically can serve both ends of the building. Having the stairs that exist will definitely facilitate the movement of kids between the two floors on each side. This is really more to help get kids from the classroom wings into, as Dr. Bitt said, into the core facilities, the cafeteria, the gym, the auditorium, all the music spaces. In fact, we're actually, a couple of options, we're still studying options, but a couple of options we looked at were, is that the right configuration for the stair, or do the stairs belong tucked up to the library instead of to the classroom wing? Do they fit better? Because really, when you look at how they would feed off to the core, you'd have a direct shot from the core into the stairs as opposed to coming around the corner to get into the stairs. So we are definitely looking at some options there to see how the stairs would fit into the building and maximize the ability and access with flow of the kids, which is really the primary challenge that we're trying to solve. So we are looking at options. I think there are several options to be considered. But to answer your question, I think we're leaning toward probably leaving the stairs there that exist. One of the things we talked about this week was just going over to school, now that school's back in session, and actually just having one person, myself and Kelsey, sit in the stair towers during, classrooms and start counting kids with a clicker, and just really see where the kids are coming from and try to analyze where are the maximum flows and try to address them, and that may steer us in a direction of one option versus another. So you'll likely see us in that building in the next week or two, just clicking kids. So we want to understand the circulation.
You just need to videotape it.
A comparison you might think of for those of you that have been on the board for a while. So at Elmwood, at the end of the second floor, you might remember there used to be that staircase that went down, and the top landing was really weird because you would open the door like onto the landing and it was really hard to navigate. So during Elmwood's construction, that was not a functional stairwell. So we actually got rid of that stairwell, we made that into an office on the second floor, and did some things on the first floor there. And we added very similarly a structure like this outside of that, which was a new larger stairwell. In this case, these stairwells that we have now they're plenty functional, they're just not big enough. So really there isn't necessarily anything else we could do with that space if we close that space off. So maintaining them for the purposes of Brian shared probably makes the most sense, but obviously we need a bigger stairwell too.
And none of this would interfere with any changes you want to make to the cafeteria common area. I know that has been talked about before, that maybe leave it as it is, but the decision here would not impact any ability to make change there.
Or like the bell system or something, like let certain rooms out at different times, so the kids aren't all released at the same time.
Mr. Yan has, and even this year, has done some different things with the scheduling to try and alleviate some of the flow that happens from that core to the wings. So none of this would stop us from doing some of those procedural kinds of changes too, but it would only enhance our possibility of maybe opening up some other options there. And I think to your question, Mr. Rupp, as we look at the final design, I think that'll be one of the things that we're looking at is, does this allow us to potentially do some other things with the other core areas?
Dr. Lebo and I discussed it too. If it saves us any money, Mr. Bradley and Mr. Rupp will do the clickers.
We can handle that.
Bring it. Being that this is the last building in the district that hasn't really been touched for a while, how are we doing as far as capacity? Is this? Don't ask that question.
We like to think that this is the first building that was touched, actually.
My kids were in school, this is a brand new school, so I don't know what happened to it.
In all seriousness, the foresight that the board had when they did the addition on the back and the bridge really put us in a good position to be able to have the classroom space necessary where we're feeling the biggest pinch is in these core areas.
Yeah, and it's funny, actually, I mean, just to your point, Ms. Morgan, on the crossover bridge into circulation, certainly that was a benefit of that project, but the real driver for that project was the additional classroom space that was created. The bridge was kind of a secondary benefit to allow circulation to travel around. But yeah, the driver of that project was actually the additional classroom space.
So, like, do we feel like the cafeteria, I know the cafeteria has always been thought of maybe too small. Like,
Well, that was kind of my question, if that's being looked into, if this is a companion thing, or if it's.
if we have people eating out in the lobby.
Honestly, that has worked fairly well, but there are some aspects as we look to what are some of the next priorities that might be some options we've talked about, and Mr. Yan has talked about. Do we need to reconfigure some of that commons space rather than having the benches there, which aesthetically have been a nice aspect to that, but if we are making that space more functional as opposed to just aesthetic, are there some different things that we should do there in order to make it more functional?
I think Dr. Bitts articulated it well, and I think you both previewed it nicely. I think for us, the middle school stair addition is a priority because of the timeline and wanting to get that going, but we do recognize if you go back to the facilities planning committee and looking out to 2030, we also realize this probably isn't the last thing that needs done at the middle school, and there are other things on the list, whether it be
Asbestos abatement.
core areas of the building or HVAC, things like that. So.
We are not doing that anymore.
Not another.
I just did it because I know Ms. Morgan would have went, yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up next steps here, today was meant as a preview, but also to build on what we talked about in the spring around the track, but also where we are with the stair towers. And so as we look ahead, our hope is to at least give the board an update in September, the Finance and Facilities Committee, about where we are with replacement track and field, but also the middle school stair tower, and then possibly, depending on the work that we do between now and October, we would be looking at an approval of a change order for the track and field, but also authorization to bid for the middle school stair tower. And so more to come on these projects. Today is not the only end-all be-all, but just a update.
So how many rocks are out in the courtyard that we would have to take out?
Yeah, with the stair tower, hopefully the foundation doesn't have to go too deep, and so we'll study that, but also there.
I'm not saying anything.
No sense report.
We all should run before that session comes up again.
All right. Any other questions? Mr. Haynes is here. Right. Thank you guys for a fine presentation. We'll move on to item 5.03, construction change orders. Mr. Kashner. Mr. Longwell.
Yeah, so construction change orders, if we go to the attachments there, we have the change order summary, which is the document I really like to look at. I think it gives you a nice 50,000 foot view summary of things. But listed also are the high school project 2 change orders, so you can kind of look line by line, and also the high school project 3 change orders, and you can list the line by line. A quick reminder for the board is on the individual line by line detail items, project 2 and project 3, anything without a board approval date, that last column is what we would be reviewing with the board and then proposing approval for at the September board meeting. I'll say overall, big picture with change order summary, our projects, we've carried a 5% contingency. And I think it's a credit as we work with Crabtree Rohrbaugh, but also Mr. Kastner, our building principals, Mr. Hoffman. We've really done a nice job, I think, as a collective team managing change orders. And so when you look down through there, a lot of those projects are 2% and 3%. Even as you look at the dollar figures, one thing I was thinking about order of magnitude, $180 million, which is about where we're at between financing and cash reserves and things like that. If you were to say 5% of that, it's about $9 million in change orders. And so when you look down through, we're not anything close to $9 million. And so I think it's a testament to Mr. Kastner. I think it's a testament to the team and the work that's done on the design of the project and executing the construction. And we've been very pleased with where we are with change orders. And so I do want to talk a little bit about summer change orders, but I guess I'll pause here just to talk about the summary or anything specific to what's attached.
With the pool project, we're still on schedule, I guess, December timeframe. It does mention pool bleachers. Is that going to be just the concrete style bleacher in there? Because I think the original design was kind of that. That's one question there.
Yeah, we have folding bleachers over there.
Okay.
I think they're for the athletes on the one end,
On the one
that's
end.
where there is concrete style, but for spectators, it's.
I think they went to aluminum also.
Did they go to aluminum?
Yeah, because we looked at whether we would need a closure and on those, and you wouldn't need that for concrete. So I'm going to say that they're all aluminum.
And one other quick question, just around the scoreboard or sound for that space, was that considered in the change order or in the project at all?
The project, yes.
Yeah, they're in the project.
Great.
Yeah, there's a nice layout of acoustical panels that should be pretty effective.
Always challenging that space.
Yeah, and well, we're using them also to put a little bit of color in there too. And I think I really am anticipating that to be a pretty good space that way.
I was just gonna ask if, when it's safe, at any point, can we have a field trip to the pool area?
Yeah. Yeah, we've been discussing when this fall to bring the board over for
The high
the
school.
walk around.
You wanna check out and replace those light bulbs
Yes.
underwater.
I want to make sure they're underwater.
Oh, they are.
Schedule the pool party.
So without any questions on the attachments, I did want to just touch briefly on summer change orders and appreciate the board's partnership in kind of managing that process, because once we get into summer without our board meetings, there are things that come up on the projects, and we just really want to keep moving with the projects, and so the ability to do that, I think has been really, really helpful. And so the 3 projects I know that we had previously shared in a board update, just wanted to talk briefly about those. But at Elmwood Academy, we had an HVAC replacement change order at around $104,000. The change order around that was around the steel and reinforcing the roof to make sure, based on the size of the units, the weight of the units, that we had an appropriate structure in place to make sure that the roof would hold appropriately from a safety perspective. At the natatorium, you might remember in Project 2, the high school renovation, we had carved out from the project Hauk, who is our roofing specialist and was doing roof recoating for us as well, to allow them to do work around the curbing of the HVAC on the roof. And so in that same way, we had to do the same thing for the Project 3, which is the pool. So where the HVAC units are on the roof of the pool, we wanted Hauk to be able to do that work for us. And so that was $52,000. The significance of that is with Hauk and our roofing warranties and all of those things, you start to involve too many people and it's easy for them to point fingers at each other. And so when you have Hauk, and they do a nice job for us, by the way. We're a Trumco district, but when it's one person in the driver's seat, then it's the warranty and good conversation. And then finally, the high school auditorium, with respect to lighting upgrades, about $56,000 there. And that was to upgrade the control and some of the supporting systems to make sure that everything ties together nicely, works seamlessly, and functions the way it should. And that was like I said, about $56,000. And so those 3 things were important because we wanted to keep continuing work at the pool, high school auditorium. We wanted to keep that moving forward as school was approaching. And then finally, Elmwood, getting air conditioning for everybody in the building was certainly at the top of the list.
So saying that, is that the 239,000 was for the AVAC? HVAC?
Is that on the
Elmwood site.
The summary.
On the summary? Oh, that's Elmwood site work. And so that.
Terminating the road.
Yeah, that was the hell occupancy permit and some of the work we did there. I'd have to look to see the exact detail of that. But
That's things we've already approved.
But yeah, we've already taken care of all that. Nothing's on
I was
this.
just trying to
approval.
remind myself what that was
That
because.
in addition to what I was asking.
And that's a good point, Mr. Up. I think I didn't mention that for the board's sake, but a lot of the buildings listed, we just keep a running total for the board to see. But some of these projects were done, 4 or 5 and 6 years. Like the Kindergarten Academy, for instance, we saw that on there, but that was done quite a long time ago. So
We didn't find any more rock to remove this summer then.
Knock on wood, I don't want to jinx anything as we talk about the track. So we'll maybe reserve comment, but.
The middle school door project and the sewers up.
Yep.
What's the middle school door still in progress?
So the middle school doors, we did navigate the summer and got those installed, probably a little bit later timeline than we hoped, but the doors were installed for the start of school. There's still plywood, probably there's up, they're still doing some finishing touches on a couple spots, but I think we're in a good place there, ready for the start of school. The sewer pumps, that actually worked very well seamlessly, credit to Mr. Hoffman. That was even shorter period of time than what we thought it would take to get done. And then Elmwood HVAC, I think that went very well too. Admittedly, we've placed all the units are on, but there's always the back end work of making sure the controls see all of the units and we're able to tweak the zones. And so I'll say, just for full transparency, we're still adjusting some of those zones and getting the controls to speak to each other, but there might be some cooler spots in the building, although this time of year, probably better to be cool than hot.
So.
I'll bet you they're better than they were.
Yeah.
So the water problems we had at Broad Street that we're kind of waiting for the borough to help us or put money towards something out there. can you give us an update? Has anything been changed with that?
That's, want me to jump in?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting very close over there, but they ran into some problems with PennDOT inspections PennDOT has to inspect their structures. And that step was left out. I don't know why, what happened there. But they had to have new structures made. They're still waiting for the tops of some of these structures. But like George Street's open and all that right now, but they still have to get the last portion of these structures in place. And
What do you mean by
after we do
structures?
that,
Where the water runs into, the structures?
yeah. And they asked that we wait till that's all done before we do anything to tie in. And I think we're fine over there.
So currently, we're not still tied
We're
into,
not.
the ponds are not tied in
Correct.
for anything at the high school or.
Yeah, we're pumping the ponds. So, but it's at their request. They've had a heck of a time with this project. So.
But they've actually done most of it pending approval of.
Almost all of the underground stuff is done. Now, I don't know about down near Rudders. I really don't see what they're doing down there.
Right.
But the explanation that I got the other day for an update, because I wanted to make sure everything was open for buses and all, for us. And it is. There's no restriction there on that. But they just have some portions of structures that have to come in. And they'll get those installed. And they've been pretty good about communicating with us, to let us know what they're doing.
And the borough's been a good partner in that regard.
Oh,
I mean, they're managing their project, we had our project, but then the utilities came through and did some projects in there. And if you remember the start of last school year, that actually wasn't the borough's work, that was, I think, the water company was doing something in there. But anyway.
Sidewalks are all done there now on George Street.
Okay.
And they just opened up that Simpson and look like they're pretty much done there. I think I think the plan is to repave in the spring, is that right?
That I don't know.
I believe that's the plan, is to repave.
We're gonna be digging a little bit too.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to item 7, policy, item 7.01. First reading of revised board policy 801, public records. Longwell.
So policy 801, public records, really deals with transparency. It's obviously our belief to be transparent, but there's also certain requirements around what that transparency looks like, from the federal and state government. And it's really, in a lot of ways, guided through the right to know law. And so the right to know law, I think there's been a lot of debate over the years about the right to know law and certain elements of it, and it's that balance of accountability and transparency to like your local public or those at the state level, and then maybe those who are using it from a business lens or they're out of state and why are they even asking for these records, and the burden that it puts on school districts. And so balancing that, I think, is always important. And even the Office of Open Records has noticed that in some recent cases. I think through the spring and over the summer, we probably have talked a little bit about, I know certainly internally, some services that allow mass requests. And so you can anonymously go online and type in a request and it goes to all 500 school districts in the state, right? And is that really the spirit of things? And so PSBA has made some recommendations. We've talked to our solicitor about how to handle some of these things. Long story short, the policy, I would say, has kind of 3 main areas. Certainly some language has been updated, but the 3 main areas are that we can deny anonymous requests, right? And so if someone goes on and says, blast all 500 school districts and how many over 1,000 municipalities with a right to know request, if it's anonymous, then we can deny that. In fact, there was a local school district in the IU over from us that had denied anonymous requests, and it got appealed to the Office of Open Records, and the school district won the case because their policy specifically said they can deny anonymous requests. And so we felt like it would be good to go back to our policy and make sure we mirror the language in that way.
So the success of the suit was based solely on the fact that they had an individual policy to the school.
It was, in their policy.
In their policy,
yes.
not in the law. So.
Yeah, and I mean, they pointed to some other things, I think, in statute and regulation, but a big part of it too was their policy specifically addressed that matter. And then maybe to your point, Mr. Up, there's also been some times over the years where you get a request, but it's an email or it's written down. It's a little bit hard to discern what it is they're requesting. It's maybe not in the right format, and so I think case law and Office of Open Records, our policy addition also around they've got to use the right format and they got to use our form or a state issued standard template, and then it can't just be a 100-page essay on the 1,000 things they want to see, and it's kind of us now determining what is it they really want. There's got to be some clarity to it. And then the final area of the three is around third-party information. And so if we as a district possess third-party information and another third party asks for that information of a company or a business or organization, we now have in recent years developed some obligation to notify the parties involved that the information's been requested, can it or can't it be released? What does an appeals process look like? Because I think that starts to get into a gray area where you could have a business that has trade secrets, and is that really subject to the right to know law or not? And there's a lot of debate around that. And so our policy is updated to reflect what's our requirements to notify others and an appeal process and so forth.
Any questions, comments on revised policy 801? And we'll move that forward, I assume, to the September meeting. All right. With that, Article 9, adjournment, meeting is adjourned.